Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kay Jacobson, and I am the History and Current Events Coordinator at the Ramsey County Suburban Libraries. And today's program is co-sponsored by OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and the Ramsey County Libraries. And we're thankful to both of these institutions for their support in bringing these programs to you. Today's session is going to be on saving the Dakota language, and it is with, I'm going to say his English name, Joe Bendixson, right now. But before we start that, I want to do our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and Ramsey County Libraries are built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It's important to acknowledge the peoples on whose lands we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. So about today's speaker, I'm going to say your Dakota name, if I can say this properly, Šišókadúta. Pretty close. He is currently the linguistics director, and I'm going to massacre this one. Dakota Lapi. Oh, this is the one that I can't say. The long word.
You don't have to say that one.
But you currently are working with everything that comes out of there, making sure that it's pedagogically correct and let's see, also and linguistically sound. And you've been doing that for over 11 years. And before that, you had taught at the University of Minnesota. You have a degree from there in American Indian Studies and the Dakota language.
Yes.
And so today's session is going to be just a little different because we're going to do a lot more conversation, which means all of you out there get to ask questions throughout the presentation. So what I want to remind you of then that's really important is to put your questions in the Q&A so that I can be monitoring that there. If there's any technological issues, you're not hearing sound, you're having problems with audio visual, maybe something's lagging, please put that in the chat where Grayson from OLLI will be monitoring that to make sure that things keep working for us. If you need closed captioning, please use the CC down at the bottom. And otherwise, we are going to turn things over and start our conversation because that is an important part of our learning for today. So over to you, Šišókadúta.
Thank you. And you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll start by speaking Dakota first to introduce myself. How Medaka Yepi. Oasna Yahipi Kinera Yomakpi, which Yunkapishnin Tka Dayan Yahipido. Dakota Chaje Makupi Kin Šišókadúta Emakiapido. Nakon Washichu Ia Joe Bendixson Emakiapido. Damakota Bede Hadakia Oyanke Ed Omawapik Edi Machache Wana de Minijiska Otoi Ded Wati. Wana omaka wikchamananum sam dopa wahehayan Dakota iapi kinde unspe michichie. Dakota iapi kinde waka he wichawada. Nakon tokata kia Dakota oyate kin iapi kinde. Pedus mani pikte oasna Dakota iapa. Iapi hewa chindo. Dehan daku ote chunkumpikte echid wichoichache dona kiha wichoichache ota kiha hena wakayeja shichecha hena Dakota iapikte. Hewa dehan daku ote chunkumpika he dohanducha he otechike ka Tunkashino Wakantaka Chankukinde Unkope God Akama Unipikde Hechid Wana hena I chunkumpikde tokata kia daku washte ota ichachikte. On badaka wachi he on wana ni nachtuani do. He on wana washichu yoikte do. So it's speaking English now. I always try to start off speaking Dakota. It's our traditional language. We consider it a sacred language, gift. It's a gift. And so therefore I try to start speaking that first to honor the language I'm learning, but also the language of my people, and to keep it alive. The more we speak it, the stronger it gets. As other people have said, that every word we say, we're like breathing life into the language, every word. So try to say as many words in Dakota all the time as I can. Try to speak it throughout the day. Speak it with my youngest son, who is going to turn 7 soon, but I try to speak to him only in Dakota. Unfortunately, he hears me speak English to other people. So can't say I only speak Dakota in front of him, but I try to speak to him and teach him as many things as I can. And one of the things they always say is like, well, how are they going to understand you? And I've only spoken Dakota to him, and for some reason he understands everything I'm saying. So I don't know how that it works. You just have to do it, I guess. And then my wife, we live here in St. Paul, and she's a language student and learner and a teacher, and she's speaking the language too. I would say I'm a little more proficient than her, so she tries her best and she does a really good job. So we're both trying. Um, yeah, it's a daily thing to keep the language alive. It's something you have to do every single day, all day long. And it's challenging, but also rewarding. So I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, I'm here to chat about that, talk about saving the language. So I would say it's very difficult and draining, but like I said, it's rewarding. We're in a very difficult situation right now. If we're talking about the state of Minnesota, there's 4 federally recognized Dakota communities in Minnesota. And there's a 5th one there's more Dakota people than just on those 4 communities. But I guess if we're talking about recognition from the United States government, there's 4. And on those 4 Dakota communities, there's only one first language speaker left. When the first language speaker is somebody who that was the language they grew up as their first language. And so we only have one person left, and they're 93 years old. Former instructor at the University of Minnesota, actually, Carolyn Schomer, commonly called Carrie. And one of my people that I learned from wasn't my teacher, but I've interacted with her many times. She taught me many things. And so I would say we're kind of in a dangerous situation here in Minnesota. Unfortunately, we can't live forever. So at some point, we'll be down to 0 first language speakers. And, what do we have to do to save our language? There's so many things we have to do, but that's the situation we're in right now. There are other Dakota speakers in different places. When you think about the Dakota federally recognized tribal nations, it goes from Minnesota, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. That's in the United States. And then if you go into Canada, there's communities in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And so Dakota people are spread out over a variety, huge swath of land. And that in a way is that's good, but also it has its drawbacks because we're so far apart from each other. It's hard to interact on a daily basis. And each community has their own kind of language programs going on, or maybe other things they're doing with the language. And because we're so spread out, it's hard to work together. Thank goodness we have like new technologies like Zoom and other things that make it a little bit easier. But, being spread out has also led to some of the, in certain communities, maybe some words are no longer said, become archaic, or they've created new words for different things. So yeah, then language starts to change because we're spread out and we're not communicating as regularly. So it has led to some language attrition, but you know that's kind of the situation we're in right now, and there's not we can't all just like move to one area, and so we have to kind of work with what we have now. The Canadian side has more speakers than the United States side, so I would say they're kind of in a little bit of a better situation. But um, all if you have to think about it, all across both sides of the border, all of the speakers are elderly. There's very few young speakers. Was there a question?
Well, I was just gonna say that's true of any language, though, that it's living and it does change, and otherwise, it does die out if it doesn't continue to live and adapt
Oh yeah.
to. But it's true, the having the first, um, where it's their first language, to lose those generations is really tough, though, also. So,
Oh
and
yeah.
we do have a question. Um, they're wondering,
Ask.
how is AI being used to teach the language to young people?
Not at all.
Not at all.
The,
It's
I don't know. I mean, I think you have to. Right now, I would say zero. I mean, people have talked about maybe using it. Um, I would have to think about whether I support it or not. Right now, I don't have an opinion on it. I would have to know the benefits and drawbacks to incorporating AI into things. So I right now I don't have an answer whether I support using AI or not. I know it's going to be part of the future,
right.
so maybe that's something that has to be thought about in a good way. I guess I mean, from what I've used of AI so far, I mean, it's a nice tool to use for things, but I think, in the end, it doesn't replace somebody just putting in the hard work. It could be like maybe a tool to assist people with things, I guess, but
Right.
the best language learners and students are the ones who actually do all the hard work.
So let's see. When you started in Dakota speaking, it didn't sound emphatic, more like somewhat monotone, more like a level thing. Would a first speaker elder sound the same? Would it be without as much, I don't want to say inflection, or is it a level kind of um sound where you know how like we
Yeah.
get I don't know, I suppose dynamics in a way.
Well, I guess it's a little different because I can't see anyone, so I can only see you and myself. So I'm not really sure who's there.
Right.
And I think everyone's different.
All
Uh,
right.
so if I'm standing up in front of like a huge audience, I might have a different way of talking. But kind of talking into a blank space here, so I can't see anyone. So I guess maybe that's the reason I sounded monotone at the beginning. But everyone has a different way of speaking, even as we do as native English speakers. People have different ways of talking, and it's the same for Dakota. Some people talk differently, but there is a Dakota accent, and when you're learning to speak Dakota, a lot of the native English speakers will inadvertently bring their English accent to the Dakota language. So it's something you really have to work at as somebody who grows up speaking English. You have to work really hard to master the Dakota accent. And some people will never do it. They'll always kind of have their English accent, but it's something I've tried to work hard at. I
Yeah.
think some people say you can never sound like the a true authentic speaker of the language if you didn't grow up speaking it. And I think, to a certain extent, that's probably true. You'd probably would need to spend a lot of time around Dakota people to kind of sound like them and master their way of talking. But there's so few speakers left. I'm not sure if that will survive. So it's just stuff to think about, have fun thinking about.
Right. Well, if you consider all of the different accents that English is spoken with, even just in the US, um, there has to be different dialect, even among the Dakota tribes that you have, that um, even idioms and things that are used that have to be, they're part of that particular region and inflection, I would think.
Oh yeah, well, I think dialect is there's definitely different dialects, that's for sure. And there's
Mhm.
different regional differences, but I would say the sound of the language, the flow, the rhythm and flow of the language
It's
is
important.
unique to Dakota
Mhm.
people, and it's similar in all the places you go. And actually, in my opinion, it has crossed over to the way Dakota people speak English. So a lot of times you hear people say, "Oh, you sound like you're from the reservation," or they say, "Oh, you sound like you're." Well, they'll say, "You sound like you're from the res." It's kind of like a slang,
Okay.
but you know that crosses over to English. So the way people speak English, Dakota people speak English, will be the Dakota language has kind of influenced that a little bit. So they don't sound like English speakers. Like your American English, or it sounds different. You can hear a difference, but yeah, that's something that needs to be thought of too.
So, how is the oral tradition of the Dakota language being used in conjunction with its written form?
Hmm, good question. Well, myself, what I work on is recording people telling stories, and so that's one way to work on the uh, oratory of our language, to preserve the fluent speech, uninterrupted fluent speech of Dakota people, where they're only speaking Dakota, no English, and for long blocks of time. Sometimes when I record these stories, people can talk anywhere from 5 minutes, 10 minutes, up to 30 minutes, 60 minutes. The last recording I just did, with the people speaking, they talked for 50 minutes, all in Dakota, no English. So, you have to try to preserve that, because, like I said, there is going to be a point where there are no first speakers left, and
Mhm.
we'll have to use those recordings to hear what fluent speech sounds like, so we can try to replicate it as much as possible, even though we might not get close. Uh, so that's one way. I mean, people do other things too. You can listen to the recordings and transcribe them. That's always a useful tool for advanced language learners to increase their vocabulary and to understand how the language is put together. And so it's a really useful tool. Another thing people can do is use clips or parts of the recordings in their classes as teaching tools. So that's another method. Sometimes people just put them online as resources for people to share. You can find stuff on YouTube, or maybe other people like come out with podcasts or videos. So there's a variety of methods being implemented now for using oral or Dakota oratory, as a language learning tool, or to preserve it. So it's really good. But the for the written too, we need to, in my opinion, have like an across the board approach. We have to do everything. So a lot of times people think about Dakota as an oral language, but in the 19th century, Dakota people were literate. They knew how to read and write in their own language. There was a Dakota language newspaper. They would send letters to each other. There's copies of them at different historical societies. So there is written materials, Dakota Bible, hymnals, other books produced in the language. So it was Dakota people were literate in their language, and then it was around the early to mid 20th century that kind of that literacy started to fall off when Dakota people stopped teaching their younger people how to read and write in the language and speak the language. There was that intergenerational transfer of the languages interrupted. And because of that, you see the decline of reading and writing in the Dakota language too. And I think, we need to bring back a strong literacy component to the language, because literacy is very important for language learning. And all of our people are already literate in English. And so if you're literate in another second language, that will increase your language learning. Will give you more options for teaching tools and methods. And so if we only relied upon the oratory, the oral transmission of the language, will kind of be limiting ourselves. And everyone's going to read and write in English anyways. And so why not just read and write in our own language? Because if I see everyone on social media, or other ways of reading and writing, books or magazine articles or whatever, why not have those all in our own language? So right now there's not too many materials out there where it's written in our language. The list is growing slowly, but in the future I hope to see a huge amount of materials produced, where it's the books, the whatever materials they are, it's exclusively written in Dakota with no English.
Mhm.
That's what I would like to see in the future. Right now, a lot of it is bilingual,
Bilingual, yeah.
Dakota and English. But when you start off learning, you need some bilingual materials so you can like start your learning process. But as people get to like an intermediate advanced level, when you get to an advanced level of language learning, you're going to need materials where it's written exclusively in that language. And so that's what we would like to see in the future.
So could you describe how you learned the language, and have you spoken it since childhood? Someone's wondering.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll start with the latter part. No, I did not speak it since childhood, unfortunately. Um, there was a common kind of like words, or maybe even you might call them slang words, that people say, Dakota people say, that were shared with me and my siblings as we were growing up. And so we would hear older people saying these, and sometimes we'd even were told what they meant. And so we started using them too. So I guess that's the beginning of one's language learning journey, if you want to think about it that way. I know the earliest memory I have learning the language is when I was about 2 or 3 years old. I don't remember exactly when, but my brother was going to this Head Start on our reservation, and uh, he was the teacher was teaching Dakota language words, and I for some reason I remembered those words as I grew older. I remembered, and it was we were counting. And so I remembered those my whole childhood. And I guess that maybe goes to show when you teach the young people, they just like,
Mhm.
absorb it and they learn it. Uh, but as I got a little bit older, we knew all these like kind of common words, and there wasn't like a great deal of them. But we're talking like a couple dozen maybe. And I found a copy of my father had a Dakota language dictionary, uh, and so I would look through that and try to learn some of the words out there. It just kind of was curious to me. And as I became a high school student, I started to become more and more curious about all of it. That's how I got my Dakota name when I was a teenager, and I just started to become more curious as time went on. And as a young adult, I attended a Dakota language community class. It was free. It's offered by the other Dakota language instructor at the university, Neil McKay. So then he said to come study at the university. So I did. And then I left in 2005 to go work with a Dakota language speaker at the Shock Bay and Bedewakantu Dakota community. Commonly said Shakopee Medwakaton, which is incorrect pronunciation, but I went to work there with the speaker. We worked together for 3 years, learned a lot from him. Then a job opened back up at the university, and I applied and got in and worked from there for 14 years until 2022, I believe. And I left there to become the editor of our Dakota Language Dictionary app. And we also are working on some other materials. I'll be coming out with a book that's written all in Dakota. It's got 12 short stories. And so we're hoping to have that published here this spring. And just trying to do as much as possible to create materials and learning opportunities in the language. Myself, learning, like I said, I started at the university. But I think, the other thing is just like trying to interact with fluent speakers and learn from them, record them, transcribe the recordings, and every day just try to speak the language all day long. And so when you do that, you find out what you can't say, and then you have to go learn that and figure that out. So it's just like a daily thing.
No. Um, okay, just talking about the University of Minnesota program that you're a part of, do you feel that that was successful in helping keep the language alive in terms of when it was formed? And because it's just like we have to have the programs available, otherwise it will definitely die. But how much of an increase did you see in just that time at the U of
Well, there's when I started learning at the university back in 2000, um, I remember there was not very many students in the class with me. So it was like about maybe 10 or so of us. And by the time I finished the program as an undergraduate, there was only like 3 or 4 of us. So well, that happens. You go from beginning class to your advanced class as a student's number of students always goes down. But that's kind of how it was when I started as an instructor. That you'd get sometimes you'd have like 7 students, sometimes you have 10, sometimes you have 14, kind of like wax and wane, and uh so having like 14, or one year I had like 17 or 18 students, and I was like, well, this is a great. But the language learning classes were capped at 20. So yeah, the college would always kind of like remind us to keep our numbers high, but I think a lot of Dakota people are on the lower rung economically of society, so it's hard for them to afford the classes.
Yeah.
So sometimes they would take it as just a class. There is a scholarship, but we only had like a handful of scholarships. Um, and some of the scholarship students were your non-traditional students. So, they're kind of juggling a lot of things in their personal lives. And
Mhm.
so coming to class is a little bit of a challenge for them. A lot of people did it, but some, it was too much. But I think as we as I got closer, I think, yeah, towards my like ninth or 10th year, we decided to like go for the Dakota language major. And the college said we didn't have enough students to have a major. So then I went out and actively recruited a lot of students, traveling around and, talking to a lot of different people in the community. We were able to take the classes hybrid, online, in person. And that year, I think it was fall 2018, and we increased enrollment a lot. But then the following year we went like completely online using Zoom in fall 2019 before the pandemic started. And we went from like beginning level class, because it was capped at 20. We ended up we had to open another section of the class. So we had two sections on the beginning level, and we ended up combined, there was like 66 students or something like that. It was over 60 students. So we had like exceeded the cap for the class. And the following year, I believe it was like around 40 or 50 students. So, the amount of students wanting to learn, was good. And because of that, the university gave us the Dakota language major. They didn't really have any excuses left once we had all the students. And so, I was just happy to be part of that effort to get the Dakota language major. I would say it's good to have classes like this at the university level. It's really important to have a Dakota language major, and I'm just happy that we were able to establish like a high level of language learning, because you need that. You need something where people pursue it as a scholarly endeavor, and try to reach a high level of language
Mhm.
proficiency. Because if you don't have those expectations, then we're not setting a high enough goal for people, and the future of the language is in doubt. So we need to have high standards for ourselves. And so I always try to have a really high standard for my classes and make sure that the students, when they left, because I taught the beginning and intermediate level 4 semesters, I always wanted them to leave at least being able to speak at a intermediate low level, and that they could continue the language learning even if they decide to quit there. Because I know a lot of people, when they're majoring, they had to have 2 years of language to graduate, and so a lot of people just took 2 years and they didn't go on. A few people went on to like advanced Dakota and beyond. And now that we have the major, I suspect there's probably more students, taking all 4 years of the language. But for my part, when I did those classes, I wanted to make sure that if they stopped there, that they at least were at a high enough level that they could possibly continue to learn on their own or represent the program in a good way.
So, are there any strategies for teaching the community or efforts to get it into, say, public school? Because oftentimes you need to have, like you say, learning at a young age is what generally makes it stick and easier to carry on. Are there any strategies in place for that, or something to work towards still.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I'm a part of this nonprofit organization, and you were trying to say the name of our organization earlier. It's Dakota Iapi
Yappy. Okay.
Okoda Kichie, and Iapi means language,
Okay.
and Okoda Kichie means like a group of friends, which is one way of saying society. So we call ourselves Dakota Language Society. And what we try to do is create materials for people to use, but we also offer language learning experiences.
Okay.
So we were doing these seasonal language camps at Bellwyn Conservancy, and we offer those to anybody in the local area who wants to come. Sometimes people even come from far away to attend, and generally we get anywhere from like 40 to 50 people. Sometimes one time we got up to like 70 plus people. And so we work with some local teachers. We brought in the past, we brought in teachers from out of the area. Sometimes fluent first speakers attend the camp. So sometimes when that opportunity happens, when that arises, people who are learning, that's sometimes their first interaction with the first speaker is at some
Mhm.
of these camps. And so it's really encouraging for a lot of them to say, hey, look, there's actually meeting somebody who speaks the language, it's their first language. And so it's an amazing opportunity for some of these beginner learners, and an amazing opportunity for our intermediate to advanced people to interact with other people, but also maybe even have an opportunity to teach. So some of the younger people who are young adults, they would be mentored on how to teach the language, and create lesson plans. So that was one of the opportunities we're trying to create. It's always a challenge to do these things because of grant funding, and you have to search for that because you have to pay for these things. You know, they cost money to have the food, to pay for people to teach and travel, and if they're from really far away, you have to get them hotel rooms. So it's not easy to do some of these things, but when we do them, we're really happy to have them. uh there's also like quiz bowls for that people throw, and I know there's one coming up next month at Mystic Lake Casino that's being done through Minnesota Indian Education Association. So we'll be there, part of that. So there's opportunities like that. It's hard to, I would say it's really hard to like create a lot of those places because you have to pay for it. But when we can do it, it's really encouraging to see all the people who are interested. So that's why it's important to have like institutions do it too, like the University of Minnesota or other educational institutions to continue to offer these things, because there's funding for those things at the different institutions. And not only like your state institutions, but also your tribal institutions, are doing things too at their level. So I think, across the board, community organizations that are outside of any governmental institution, uh, they're doing things, but also we need like your educational institutions to continue to do things too.
Okay. And okay. Just want to double check the website for your society is dakota.org, Dakhota. Okay, I'm putting that in chat for
Yes.
everyone. So if you want to check that,
Mm-hmm.
you can and enter. There we go.
Yep.
So, okay, and we have more questions. So I'm just wondering, do you know of other language saving efforts underway in other Native nations? And I'd say that there are.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, I think it's going to be an interesting era to be in language revitalization. We're entering a kind of different world now in the past like several months. And, in my opinion, language learning is all about, saving these different languages. And I wouldn't really count it as part of like diversity. I know kind of diversity is under attack right now. I think, preserving one's language is an essential right.
Mhm.
It's a right of a people's survival, and right of people to exist. And when their language disappears, they lose connection to their ancestors and all the knowledge that's held within that language. So I would say that I would hope that that's not part of like the attack on diversity, that language isn't thrown in with that. But I guess we'll find out here as we go into the future, these next few years. And but there are a lot of people across the world who are part of what you would call lesser commonly taught language. I think some of they kind of say lichtal, lesser commonly taught language. And most indigenous peoples across the world fall into that category. uh because they're not the language of commerce or larger nations. They're uh, you know small groups of people. And so it's across the world, indigenous peoples are revitalizing their languages, and some people are in a better position than others. Myself and a few of my friends, we gathered a group of language learners, and we took a trip to New Zealand to visit the Maori. They call New Zealand Aotearoa, and so we visited their country and we witnessed what they were doing with their language. They've been at it since the 70s, and they have I think they said their population was 1 million and of Maori people, and they said 20% of their people speak the language in some at some level. Obviously some are way better than others, but that we were comfortable in quoting that number. So that's roughly 200,000 speakers. And at one point it was considered to be an endangered language, and so that means it was going to vanish. So they've managed to do a lot to revitalize their language, and they've said there's still challenges every single day, and they're doing everything they can to oh, what did they say? There's like a lot of apathy towards it now. People are like comfortable, like, oh, we've done the work, hard work, and there's not much left to do. So there's kind of they're fighting against that now.
Mhm.
I did travel to visit the Hawaiian people and their lands, and they told me last time I was there that they created 20,000 new speakers. So they're still challenged all the time, similar to the Maori. And they are trying to avoid that sense of complacency. So they're working really hard. But you go visit these other places where they're like, seems like they're light years ahead of us. They have schools from like daycare all the way to doctorate level, and you can stay in your language all the way through and not have to speak English ever. So that's really encouraging to see something like that. And it's like, well, that would be the goal here, is let's do something like that. I mean, there's other people that are doing lots of amazing things in other tribal nations. I know the Ojibwe seem to be ahead of the Dakota. They have schools, and they're doing a lot of great things with their languages. But anywhere you go, we're one generation away from losing the language again. We're there. We could just instantly be back where we were. So we have to work hard every single day, and think about like what our succession plan is going to be. What is our succession plan for the next generation? And that's something I think about all the time because, like I said earlier, we can't live forever. And myself, I thank goodness I'm in good health right now. But, as in my 40s here, I have to think about like, well, who's after me? Who is the next person that is going to take over when I'm not here? Who's going to be the dictionary editor when I'm gone? Who's going to write these materials? So we have to mentor the young adults, the 20-year-olds, and try to help them become that next generation of language scholars and people who are going to create the resources for future generations.
Mhm.
And it's difficult, because you have to try to mentor as many people as you can because you never know which ones of them are going to stick with it. And, so it's been an honor to be a part of a lot of young people's language learning journey, and to see some of them go on to become teachers, and continue to learn the language, to speak it, teach it to others. And, that makes me happy. Like I was part of that, and to still work with some of them and mentor them. And so I'm glad that I'm able to do that. And, hopefully we can keep to do more of that. So, we our future is secure.
So, um, how does all this, like the landscape, ceremonies, cultural practices intersect with the language and preservation of it? And how does being surrounded by the English and Western culture dilute then the language? And so it's kind of like looking at the two different sides of it.
Can you say the first part again?
How does all sacred landscape, ceremonies, cultural practices intersect with the language? And I would say the preservation of.
Okay. Well, as they always tell us that the our language is based upon our way of life, and the way of life includes so many different things, and that could be interaction with the land. So it could be traditional practices of harvesting and planting and interaction, different activities we do on the land. It could be ceremonial. It could be cultural practices, that dancing or singing or other cultural events that are done throughout the year. So, like all of those, like it encompasses like what we call our way of life, and our language is based upon that. So, if you start learning the language, you're kind of automatically learning about some of these different cultural practices. I would say right now, a vast majority of those activities are done in English, with some language involved. And hopefully in the future, when we do some of these different events, they'll be done exclusively in our language with no English. And so that would be my hope for that. I don't know. What was the second part of the question?
And then how does being surrounded then by all of the English and Western culture dilute um, the language? Um,
There is definitely some English influence upon the language, and that can happen over time, especially when people ask you to translate something from English into Dakota. And so I've seen it where you'll ask an fluent first speaker of the language, how do you say this phrase in Dakota? And because you're asking in English or all in English, like you're saying the phrase in English, when they say it in Dakota, there can be like some crossover from English into Dakota. Uh, and it may not be necessarily the way it's said in our language, or maybe the way you say it in English, that's like kind of an English phrase or thought that maybe isn't even said in our language. and maybe you would have to think about it and come up with a different way to say it for our language.
Mhm.
So there is definitely some influence there. Mostly it's kind of like from your beginner students, that really make a lot of the mistakes. But I think there is a danger, like when you're asking people to translate, that the translation can be influenced by English.
Would you say English grammar influences um,
Oh
because
yeah, it does. Sometimes, well, we have like possessive verbs.
okay.
So the verb will indicate if it is belongs to me or or somebody else. And we have a word that means it belongs to me or it's mine. And so sometimes English learners will, or people learning the language, they will use the word it's mine in a sentence where you could use a possessive verb. So that's a common mistake.
Mhm.
So I would say sometimes your beginner students will use the English word order in our
Yeah.
sentences, and that will kind of mess things up. Um, so those are the most common mistakes.
So, yeah, and I know we talked briefly. I'm like when we were talking before this session about signage and just in our state parks and our historical sites and stuff now reflecting the Dakota language in there and seeing, which reminds us then of the influence that has had here in Minnesota on our language and especially in places. And I think that um, that's such a good reminder to us that English melds so many languages together and
Mhm.
that we are influenced by it. And I feel that we have an obligation then to keep those languages alive because of that impact that they've had on what we speak natively. So, um, yeah, so I'm appreciative of seeing those around now, and so it's like, I'm gonna try, and now I'm probably gonna download the app too, so because I did find that
Well, yeah, there's a lot of signage being done now, and there's kind of like emerged like a few different orthographies. Historically, like you said before, like Dakota was an oral language, so there was not a written, uh,
Mhm,
there was never like a writing system historically. And so one was developed by early Christian missionaries, the Pond brothers, Samuel Gideon Pond, in the 19th century. And then that was later adapted by Stephen Riggs. And so these were Euro-American missionaries to the Dakota people. And their mission was to convert Dakota people to Christianity.
mhm,
And what we've kind of uncovered in some of our current research on the Dakota Language Dictionary Expansion Project is that they may have inadvertently altered the language because they were language learners, and some of their writings could have influenced current contemporary Dakota speech. So that's kind of interesting to think about. That's one of the current working theories we're kind of talking about. This that they may have a huge influence upon our language contemporary. And what we see from some of the Dakota writers in the 19th century is that uh, their speech is way better than these missionary speech. And so the writings that we're using in our research, we're trying to use from these fluent Dakota speakers who wrote articles in this Dakota language newspaper. And the newspaper is called Iapi Oaye. So, like I said, Dakota people were literate in the 19th century. So they're writing these articles for the newspaper, and their speech is far superior to the missionaries. So you know, a lot of the signage now is based upon like a couple different orthographies. And so you have the missionary orthography, and then there was an orthography developed by Ella Deloria, a Dakota scholar. She was a Dakota woman, and this is the early 20th century. She worked with a linguist named Franz Boas, and she developed an orthography. And she wrote some books. She came out with a book that a lot of people still use today called Dakota Texts. And it was the most comprehensive orthography at that time. It showed all the sounds of the language. And, uh, versus the missionary orthography was missing things. It was missing certain sounds of the language. So the orthography was then adapted later on by the University of Colorado Boulder. They kind of made a slight alteration to it. And our nonprofit, Dakota Yapi Okodaki Chie, then took the orthography developed at UC Boulder, which was based on Ella Deloria, and we adopted that as our official orthography. And we made one last final change to that, and now that's the orthography we use. It's so that was developed by a Dakota woman, Ella Deloria. And some of the other ones are based upon the missionary orthographies, which sometimes cannot cover all the sounds of the language. And so, really, if you're a language learner and certain sounds are missing, you're not going to say the words properly, especially if you're reading and you're trying to learn. And so, I really think, going forward, we need to think about like everything we're creating is going to be part of the historical record. And so we have to think really critically about creating resources and materials that showcase all the different sounds of the language. Because if we don't, we're doing a disservice to the language. So we need to be critical, have critical thought about that. Where if we don't have all those different sounds represented, then it's going to make it harder on future generations of language learners to go through our resources and learn from them.
And the written language is based on using the English alphabet, but with diacritical marks more so to help convey
Yeah,
those different sounds.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Um, some of them don't employ diacritics at all, and I think that's where you get into a lot of gray areas, and so it makes it harder for the language learners to learn. So sometimes people don't use any markings at all, and they say, "Well, just write it how you think it sounds." Which maybe I guess that could work. I don't want to put down anybody's language learning, so maybe that works for them. But if we're creating like consistent resources for
Right.
other people to learn from, one person writes it one way and then another person writes it a different way, and you line them up and like which one is right, it really creates a lot of confusion for the learners. And then sometimes they get so frustrated they might even just give up, because it's hard to learn, so we have to create high level quality consistent resources so that the learners can depend upon them to aid them in their language learning. And a lot of these signs, they're like I said, they're doing a really good job with this. They're like putting all these marks in. So I would say I'm encouraged by a lot of the signage. I've worked with a lot of different organizations, governmental entities, and museums and other places where they're trying to put a lot of the signage in our language.
Mhm.
And it's really encouraging when they reach out and say, "Hey, how can we do this?" And I'm always happy to assist them.
Yeah, because I keep thinking of how we just seem to blanketly accept the Greek and Roman, astrological, constellations and all of that. And I'm like going, I know that that was thought of differently here. And that's
Yep.
what I would love to learn is things like that, the what the constellations are called in the native languages, the animals, we use Latin for all of our flora and fauna. Um, but I'm sure that, it's like to be able to see that and have um, a guidebook for Minnesota plants and flowers in a bilingual way, but also be able to have one that's just in Dakota would be um, fascinating too. So,
Oh yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I work with this Dakota scholar astronomer, Jim Rock. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's an amazing person, and he knows all the constellations, Dakota names, and if you start talking to him, be prepared to listen for several hours because he will just start talking about all these different things that go on in the sky, and it's fascinating to just sit there and listen to him speak. So I really enjoy that. There's a lot of people who have knowledge of the different medicinal plants and all their different uses, and so it's important to preserve that and get that all written down in our language. Like there's no end to the things we can do in our language. It's
right,
because if you think about everything we do in English and all the different professions are all in the English language, we have to do all those in Dakota, and so there's no end to what we can do with our language. And so I think it's a really important field for young emerging scholars to think about, you know what can you do in the language. There's so much you can do. We have to create all the subjects in every field for our language, so we had to think about mathematics, geography, social studies, because these are all resources we need at these different language schools that we have to create. And we need teachers at the schools, we need administrators, we need people, doing the other jobs, janitor, lunch worker, and they all have to speak our language. We can't have anybody speaking English at any of these different places.
right. Have some immersion schools.
Yes, we have to have
All,
these
yeah,
different schools, and then we need people to write the books for the schools to publish them. We need TV, radio shows, we need online materials, and they all have to be in our language. And we need people behind the scenes who have high level of expertise in the language, who can make sure that whatever is produced is at a is really high quality. So I mean, it's seems a little daunting when you think about it that way, but I think it's really exciting because as a young person, you could be part of that. So I encourage, maybe if there's some young people here listening to this, I think about it. You could be part of this renaissance of Dakota language.
um, does there seem to be interest from the youth to learn Dakota?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of interest, but we're in a teacher shortage right now. We
Right.
don't have a lot of Dakota language teachers, so we need to create those. But the people who are teaching also need to be advanced master speakers. So myself, I have to learn every single day so I can teach the teachers. So, it's a good problem to have, but we're kind of in a race against time, but we need to create more teachers, so we can fill all these different positions. But I would say a lot of young people are interested and they want it. They want the language, but we need to also have like super high level quality of teaching. Really the teachers of the language have to be the best speakers of the language. And if you're not one of the best speakers of the language, then you're going to create poor level, or your students or their language learning is not going to be that good. So, I'm not trying to put down any people who are teaching language now, but I say we have to aspire to something. We have to, the teachers. So I think about myself as a teacher. I want to learn more and I want to get at such a high level that my students, I'm offering them the best of the best. And really, when you think about like the kids, like the younger ones, your daycare or your pre kindergarten level, those teachers have to be the absolute best of the best of the teachers because they're teaching the little ones, and those little ones that's gonna become part of their identity, and they're gonna carry that forever. So it's fun and also challenging. So yeah.
So, let's see. So somebody's remarking about interested to hear more about the archival preservation you're doing with the recordings. There being only one first speaker left for you. Are you just recording first speaker or are you recording any other?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just recorded the first fluent speakers right now.
Okay.
Like I said, most of them are elderly. We're talking like you're lucky if you find somebody who's in their 60s who grew up speaking Dakota as their first language. So most of them are 70, 80, 90 years old. And we have to record as many of them as we can right now. Just in the past couple of years, so many of them have passed away. You know,
Mhm.
it could just be like old age or other things, but a lot of them died during the beginning of the COVID pandemic,
Mhm.
and so we lost a great number of speakers, some of the best, and so it was a real heartbreaking time to be part of this field. But there's still a lot of great speakers left, and when I say a lot, that might say, oh, there's a lot of people left, so you don't have to worry. I'm just saying a lot for what we have now. But we think about the number of Dakota people just across United States and Canada. The population's probably like maybe if we're lucky, like 300,000 or 400,000 Dakota
Mhm.
people across even the border. Um, and out of those, I'm just being generous there. Let's just say 300,000. Out of that, there's probably less than 1,000 fluent speakers left for Dakota and Lakota. Dakota and Lakota are related languages. If we're just thinking about Dakota, I would say, just, guesstimating here, there's probably less than 200 speakers left. So it may that just putting that in perspective, it doesn't seem like a lot, but of all those people we have left, we have to utilize them as much as we can because one day they're not going to be here.
Do you go in with specific topics or themes that you're
Oh yeah.
trying to?
Yeah, I want them to talk about like different cultural practices or things, what things were like when they were younger.
Mhm.
A lot of times that'll bring up a lot of memories for them, and they'll start talking about other things that I didn't even ask them to. Especially when you're thinking about your childhood or things you've done during your childhood. So, might ask them about different cultural protocols, different cultural events or ceremonies, or harvesting different things, or planting, or hunting, or fishing. Different sporting activities. Stuff like that. There's just the different things that go on in the Dakota world. Like, talk about this today. One of my mentors, the one who I'm writing this book we're publishing, he is 86 years old and he wants to record about like, uh, well, his wish, but he wants to talk about like what's going to happen when he's no longer here. And so that's one of the topics he wants to talk about, and we're going to be recording that soon. So there's a lot of different things you can talk about. Just think about all the things we talk about in English, and some of that we want to record, and of course some of it's unique to our people. But yeah, we got to record everything we can, and it's fun, but it's also sometimes it's a little stressful because it's like we only have so much time. We got to do as much as we can.
So someone is wondering, it's like, are you thinking where are the Dakota speakers if they grow up being just Dakota speakers? Um, where would they work? But I'm thinking that they would end up being bilingual, would end up, I would think, being the
What's the
main
question?
thing. They're going, where are all these Dakota speakers going to work if they just speak
Well, they're
Dakota?
retired now. Most of my, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm in my 40s, but I wouldn't want to be working when I'm 80, you know.
Yeah.
So
But I'm also imagining if you get schools where it would be immersion, they would still be speaking English. um, at home.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people my age and younger grew up speaking English, and a lot of our parents and grandparents didn't teach us the language, and that's why we're in the condition we are now. Where if you go to like other nations of the world where they speak their languages, they teach it to their children, and that's why I've made this dedicated effort to only speak Dakota to my son, so at least he can grow up understanding it. Right now, he's unfortunately there's not a lot of Dakota language schools, and even if they are teaching Dakota language at a school, usually it's as an elective where it's like maybe twice a week, 3 times a week for an hour, at the most. So you're not really learning that much. There's not a lot of schools where you can go and just be immersed in that language. And even if we do have those schools, it would be extremely hard to staff them with this teacher shortage. Right? There's not even enough teachers to staff the current schools. So that's a challenge. So my son, he unfortunately is going to an English school, so he's speaking English at the English school, but he understands everything I say, and when we're talking, I can get him to speak language to me.
Right. And I think it's almost in this world being multilingual is so beneficial.
Oh yeah, of
It
course.
would be fabulous if they could grow up being first speakers of Dakota, but knowing that being bilingual, because even as you said, learning a new language helps you understand your English even more too.
Yeah, and it's never too late to learn your language. So when we went to New Zealand, there was this family there, and the parents decided they were going to learn a language. Their children are all teenagers, and the teenagers all started learning the language too. And then they all became speakers of the language within like 4 or 5 years. So it's possible to like do even as like a teenager or an adult. Like you just got to put in the effort and be dedicated, and just like one day at a time you slowly take over until before you know it, that's all you're speaking, it's your
No.
language. it's
Um,
it's a lot of fun.
so yeah, I mean, I consider my dad grew up speaking Norwegian at home until he went to school and then lost a lot of his Norwegian and but then him and I took Norwegian together and he had those memories embedded in him and he took that vocabulary out again that he didn't know he had. So,
Oh yeah, actually, it's interesting you said that, because my dad, his father, so my paternal grandfather was Norwegian, 100% Norwegian. And his my great grandfather came from Norway and settled close to the reservation that I'm from. And so they all spoke Norwegian. And then so my grandfather, he that was one of his languages, and he could speak English too. But when my father was little, he also spoke Norwegian, even though he was part Dakota. So he was a mix of Norwegian, Dakota, and French. And so on his mother's side, her mother's father, he could speak Dakota and French. And so he grew up speaking Dakota, French, and Norwegian. And he said that as he got older, uh, he lost all of that.
mhm.
But I kind of wish he would have kept it.
I know we don't know what we have until we stop doing it
Yes,
sometimes.
exactly.
So, um, okay, couple things. So many different comments. Oh, someone's going, can you give an example of something that is expressed in the Dakota language that isn't in English? I mean, that, we just don't seem to have. I think of like the Eskimo, they always say that they have 20 words for snow and we have one. Um, but something along that line of something that's expressed that you can't, it's hard to translate to English.
Uh, Hard to translate to English. I mean, there's like some idioms and things like that that don't translate very well, I guess. Uh, you know, uh, like a just like a word or
I don't know. It's just kind of like, and sometimes it's good to have to struggle, I think, to.
this is the thing. Well, it's not something like I carry a list around of like words that don't translate to English. I mean, I guess one of the most popular ones that people think about is like, this is one that people fight over all the time. Is in English we say good morning,
Okay.
and in Dakota you would never say good morning. So we just say hello to each other. Like, and there's two ways to say hello. There's a one that everyone can say, and then there's one that's exclusively masculine. And
Okay.
so the one everyone says is huh,
Uh,
and then the masculine is how. So you're just supposed to say that, when you see somebody, you might say something like Dayan Nishtima he, which means did you sleep well? Dayan Nishtima he. Or you might say something like Dokera Niampa he, which means how did the sun greet you? Which I guess maybe that doesn't translate to English.
right. It's
People say, "How does the sun greet you?" Like they might be like, "What?" So, but in English we say "Good morning." In Dakota, that would be literally translated. It would be "Hach ana washte," which means the morning is good, and that sounds weird in kind of fluent Dakota speech, like the morning is good as a greeting.
right.
So, but people have started to say that, and some of the first speakers say that, but that's kind of an English influence. But so traditionally we wouldn't say that, and you know if somebody's going to bed, we might say just like Daya Ishtima, like sleep well. But in English, you say good night. Would be Dakota be Hayetu Ashte, which means the night is good. So yeah, some of those don't really translate very well, and yeah, it's kind of fun to learn about some of those things.
Okay. And glancing through a few more here. Do you think that the Fort Snelling history exhibit, does a honest and compassionate thing in regards to the Dakota somebody's saying, or
I don't know. I've never seen it.
I don't, I couldn't say
Never
either. They're
seen
like
it.
going,
When
I
was
would
it?
still recommend that you go and see it because it's still going to expose you to more than what you probably knew previously for people.
Oh, well, when did it open?
I think there's a current one out right now, Different Voices or something like that, and
I haven't
showing.
seen it. Actually, I haven't gone through any of the exhibits at the History Center in a long time. I go over there and meet with people, but I don't walk through the exhibits.
Yeah,
And,
this one is specifically at Fort Snelling. I just
the first time I was there, not this past summer, but maybe the summer before that. So 2 summers ago was the last time I was there, and I saw some stuff there then. So if that's it, then I thought it was all right.
So, and somebody else pointed out that the Bell Museum has wonderful videos of native presentations on the sky. I will probably go
Oh
and check
yeah,
that
they
out.
had Jim Rock in there. So yeah, that's cool.
So, okay, let's see. Somebody's wondering, can native people from anywhere take language classes at the University of Minnesota Morris for free? That I don't know. Um,
Um, you have to get into the school first. So if they admit you in to the school, that's always a question that people ask. Well, you can just go to the U of M Morris for free. And I was like, well, yeah, but you have to get accepted
you have to
first. They
apply.
don't just let everyone in for free, otherwise everyone would be there. But yeah, like anybody can take these classes at the university level because they're open to all students regardless of where they come from. So as long as you're a student at the university, you can take them. And I think you can take them through the College of Continuing Education too.
So, okay. Would you say that the majority of Dakota people are supportive of the efforts that are being made to preserve and expand the use of the language?
Oh yeah, the vast majority are. I think with any group, there always have a few detractors, but I would say most of the people really want to preserve our language.
So, Okay. Let's see. I know Dakota is related to Lakota. You were saying, are any of the other indigenous languages related, or are they very much separate? Kind of
Well, yeah, you have language families. So you have the Siouan language family, and commonly you think of that, you think of Dakota, Lakota. You also have the Assiniboine, or sometimes they've referred to themselves as Nakota. You also have the Omaha or Umaha. Uh, who else? There's a lot of them. The Crow, Ho Chunk or Winnebago. Um, there's a lot in that family of languages. I'm not even listing all of them. It's kind of hard to remember the whole list off the top of your head, but you have the Algonquin language family is, I believe, the largest in North America, which, includes our neighbors to the north, the Ojibwe, and there's a bunch of other languages in there. You also have the Athabascan, so that has like Dene or Navajo, and so there's different language families, and you know, I think they had a chart of it over in the linguistics department at one point. I don't know if it's still there, and California had a lot of varieties of languages, so they kind of had the most variety. But yeah, there's a lot. And so Dakota and Lakota are closely related, but there are there are a lot of differences, and so that's what makes them separate languages. You know, there's certain things they do we don't do, and at once we were kind of one language, but then we broke apart and um, become separate. So, which happens over time with all languages.
Yeah. Um, Trying to speak to the app that you helped create, the dictionary
Mhm.
app. Just I think I looked up the right one on my phone, but is it free?
Yes,
Okay.
it's
That was
free.
one of those.
It's purple and green.
I think so. See if I can find
Yeah,
it again on.
it's like a floral design with a purple and green flower.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I did find the right one. And
Mhm.
that does have not just definitions but it also has pronunciation in the app, does it not? So
Yes, it does. We do conjugate verbs for first person singular, so that'd be like I and me, and for first person plural, which would be like we all. But if you know how to conjugate verbs, then you should be able to take from those two conjugations and conjugate the verb in its entirety. And what we are doing in our dictionary app expansion. So this is 1.0 currently, but now we're going to have 2.0. And what we're going to do is add example sentences to some of the words, not every single word, but some of them. It takes a lot to put these example sentences together. We're using historical data written by Dakota people. I believe we're going to add about, uh, I don't want to say the exact number because I don't have it, but I know it's over 10,000 plus example sentences. So our hope is that we'll record the audio for every example sentence and include that it. And then there's going to be several thousand new entries. We're thinking there might be around 3,000 plus new entries into the dictionary database. And so then we want to record the audio for each we call them like header words. That's the word you would look it up. Uh, but also under that, there's all the different verbs. And so for every verb, we are going to include a complete conjugation of every verb. And so
okay.
there will be an inflection chart that shows all the different inflected forms of the verbs. So that's really exciting to add all these audio and all these different verb forms and all these different example sentences. And so it'll create a wonderful experience for your language learner. And hopefully, this is just the beginning of many updates to come. So hopefully in the future, we'll have even more example sentences and even more audio and even more entries because we're still doing research on the language.
Okay.
I
And
mean,
so if
just
you,
last week I was recording a speaker and he gave me a new word that we don't have in any database. So we're gonna add that to it. You know, every time you interact with these speakers, you get new words to add to the database.
which is cool. And so therefore it's discovering things, especially because if things haven't been written, then and there's so many languages that haven't had written forms until well after they've been established languages. So
Yes.
um that's why it's exciting to discover new words. I'm sure that was very exciting for you. So if you do go to that website that I gave you in chat, people, you can enter the name, the Dakota Iapi, and I'm just missing it again.
Yeah,
um,
Okodakichie.
thing. I,
Yeah.
oh yes, that will get you to the app if you look in like Google Play Store or Apple iStore in
Yeah.
case you want to add the app as a download, because that would be a fabulous thing to take with you if you are going out and seeing the signage in the native language to be able to learn how to say it properly when you're seeing it. And because I think that's one of the things, which is why I didn't want to butcher that one word because
I think it's in the dictionary, isn't
it probably is. I've just
it?
gotten the app, so so I will be listening to it. But yeah, it's one of those.
Oh, it's in here.
So yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I'm kind of stuffed up in one ear, so I
Okodakichie.
haven't understanding things has been really hard. I can't do phone calls currently. Uh
Yeah.
I can't hear currently out of my one ear. But but yeah, this has just been fascinating. And thank you everybody for all of your questions. Just didn't get to a few um that um can be you could just say that person who asked him those some of those you can look up on your own. The one he was saying he grew up near the Lower Sioux Agency and wondering what reservation you grew up near. So
Oh, yeah, Lake Traverse Reservation.
so there you go.
Yeah.
Um Otherwise, lots of thank yous from people for the wonderful session. And this has been recorded. It will go up on the Ollie YouTube channel and on the library's website. So you can always come back and reference this, recommend it to friends, people out there. We thank you so much, Shishoka, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. And is it together? Does it come Shishoka Dute, sorry, is
Oh,
that
yeah. No, well, it's two words, but can be said as one word.
as one? Okay, because I'm like,
Yeah,
what?
we don't have first or last names, so it'd just be Šišókadúta, which means Šišóka is robin and Duta is like a kind of a darker red color. So it's,
Okay.
I guess in English you'd say red robin.
So I'm like,
So
going, I
like
could
the
just be calling you
restaurant.
Robin, like Batman and Robin, but no, no, no. I
Oh
should
yeah.
make sure
No,
that
the
it's
students used to tease me. They'd say Shishokaduta yum. So like that Red Robin yum. But yeah, it's funny. But it's
so. But yeah, thank you for just sharing and just helping maybe make us more curious, and that's what we should be. We should be more curious about this so that we just continue to learn. So thank you, like I said, for all of this, and thank you all for participating in this. And
oh yeah, I
otherwise,
forgot to tell you, I'm gonna be at a language symposium this coming weekend. Should I email it to you
sure, I
or
can
just put it
always
in the chat window or
um,
I don't
always
know how
love
to do
to
that.
share more information with people. We have 1 week left in this session, and Oh yeah, this is the second to last week of our Wednesday with the Scholar. In terms of those of you at Ollie who are signing up for spring courses, I am not doing Tuesday with the Scholar this spring. I'm taking the spring off. We will be back in June with sessions in June for Tuesday with the Scholar. But I will be hosting Great Decisions and a presidential history session in the spring also. So Great Decisions is about current events. So if you want to talk about NATO or climate change, or I have one this Friday on US trade, we're talking. So but yeah, so otherwise, thanks everyone. It is currently 4 o'clock, end of our session, and everyone go out and enjoy the weather and have a good day.